The story that will be discussed here causes deep concern. It touches on topics that trouble many people: inexplicable actions and situations involving children. This case can be described as one of the most disturbing in the world's criminal chronicles. Louise Cookie Moyer was born under difficult circumstances in Estonaria, South Africa. Her life was connected with complicated people from the very beginning. In 1984, when she was 10 years old, she lost her father. Louise had a warm relationship with him. Despite his busy schedule, he always found time for his daughter. Shortly after this sad event, Louise's mother met a new man. Unfortunately, the stepfather proved to be a person with a difficult character. His presence cast a shadow over family life and created constant stress and unrest. The years of such a life did not pass without a trace. Louise developed a feeling of insecurity. The stepfather did everything to make the people around him feel inferior. When Louise came of age, she could no longer bear this treatment and looked for every opportunity to leave the family. So she hastily married the first available man named Freddie. He was 4 years older than her, but to her disappointment proved to be no better than her stepfather. The husband's behavior created an oppressive atmosphere that negatively affected family relationships. Fortunately, Louise was able to get out of this difficult relationship thanks to her mother's support. After separating from Freddie, Louise met the mechanic Christo van der Murf. He seemed calm, hardworking, and caring, which attracted Louise's attention. They began dating and soon married. The young family remained living in the same area of South Africa. First, the couple had a boy whom they named Johan, and 2 years later, on the 9th of August 2013, Poppy was born. She was a very beautiful girl, with blonde hair and big blue eyes. Everyone who knew her noticed the child's beauty, called the girl a doll, and admired Poppy. Unfortunately, Louise's new marriage also proved to be not easy. After the children were born, her husband abruptly changed and began showing aggression. Soon, the situation became very tense. The young mother understood that something had to change, as the situation would most likely not improve by itself. In 2014, 1 year after her daughter's birth, she decided on divorce. According to the woman, Christo, like her previous partner, did not shy away from verbal outbursts when it came to insults. Shortly before the separation, the situation escalated. The man's behavior became so unpredictable that the mother of 2 children was forced to request official protection. After the divorce, he was allowed to see the children 3 times a month, but only under the supervision of a social worker. Additionally, he was allowed to communicate with the children by phone once a week. Most of these conversations were recorded. Christo adhered to all regulations and seemed to be quite a righteous citizen. However, Louise insisted on the contrary and claimed that behind the mask of reliability hid a completely different person. Soon the young mother with 2 children decided to change her place of residence. Thus, she ended up 500 kilometers from her former home in the small settlement of Orania. In reality, it was a tiny place with slightly more than 1,000 inhabitants. The place was known for its quiet atmosphere and was considered one of the most prosperous in the region. Here lived descendants of Dutch, German, and French immigrants. The protagonist of the story hoped to finally ensure a peaceful life for herself and her children. The small family was warmly welcomed by the community in Orania. They were greeted by the locals and members of the Dutch Reformed Church who helped the family settle in the new place. Thanks to the community's support, the young mother was able to solve the housing question and find employment at the local supermarket. In addition, the community members supported the completion of the divorce proceedings, which Louise was in the final phase of. Significant changes occurred in the woman's life. She decided to take in her stepdaughter Marisa, her ex-husband's daughter from a previous marriage. The 14-year-old Marisa wanted to stay with her stepmother herself and offered to help with the household and with the younger children. With the community's support, the young mother managed to take the student into her care. Marisa indeed became an indispensable help. She took care of the children, cooked and kept the house in order. She fit so harmoniously into the family that the little ones sometimes called her Mama. Marissa proved to be calmer than Louise, which allowed her to deal better with raising the little ones, especially given the mother's workload at her new workplace. In 2015, Kobe Scamora moved to Orania. The community members helped him find employment at the local supermarket where he met Louise. Both had difficult relationship experiences behind them. Kobe was divorced twice, had children from each marriage, but had little contact with them. His ex-wives expressed extremely negative opinions about him, but Louise knew nothing about this. Kobe seemed friendly and nice to her. The romance developed rapidly. After a few months, they got engaged, moved in together, and married on the 14th of November 2015. Surprisingly, Kobe sent Marissa to her father the next day. This was a severe shock for the children, who were very attached to their older sister. Johan and Poppy suffered greatly from the separation from Marissa. Instead of the beloved nanny, a new man appeared who showed no hurry to give them attention. The little ones became moody and had difficulty adapting to the changes. To their disappointment, Kobe proved to be quite different from what they had hoped. Marissa's care made the children feel needed and loved. She spent a lot of time with them and became a close reference person. The stepfather, on the other hand, proved to be very hot-tempered and often raised his voice against the children when they cried. During this time, both little ones were taken to kindergarten, as the adults worked and could not ensure care at home. The teacher noticed several times how the boy hid in the bathroom when the parents came to pick him up. The children did not want to return home, which caused concern among those around them. The staff of the preschool facility described Kobe as an extremely unfriendly and irritable person who showed coldness toward children. One of the employees noticed several times a strange behavior of the child upon the parents' arrival. It seemed as if the boy was under the influence of some preparations. His reactions were slowed, which aroused suspicion about the use of sedatives. Johan was characterized by excessive activity, and the suspicion arose that the parents were trying to somehow control his behavior. However, this remained only a suspicion that found no confirmation. When the teacher addressed the parents about this, they only laughed in response. After that, such conditions were no longer observed in the child. Nevertheless, new disturbing signs appeared later, to which no significance was initially attached. The educators noticed that the boy was often dressed inappropriately for the season. Particularly strange seemed jackets and clothing with long sleeves, in which the child was brought to kindergarten even in heat. Later it turned out that this was done intentionally to hide traces of injuries on the boy. When attempts were made to undress Johan, he became aggressive and hindered the educator's actions. Thus, he spent the whole day in outerwear. The boy explained this by saying that the parents would become very angry if he took off the warm clothing. Obviously, the parents intimidated him to hide what was happening at home from the kindergarten staff. After Louise and Kobe were asked questions about the family situation, they stopped bringing Johan to kindergarten. Meanwhile, Poppy continued to attend it regularly. Later, according to the law representative's opinion, the parents decided to stop sending the younger girl to kindergarten as well. Presumably this happened because she was asked questions to which she could not give clear explanations about what was happening at home. Disturbing signs were noticed in the kindergarten. Poppy tried, despite speech difficulties, to tell the teachers about the incidents at home. She showed strange markings on herself, but the adults could not understand her words. Over time, the staff of the facility noticed unusual bruises on Poppy. They appeared in atypical places, for example on the earlobes. New markings appeared faster than the old ones healed. When the educators addressed Louise and Cobus about this, they invented new explanations each time. The parents claimed that both children, Johan and Poppy, were very active. Allegedly, Poppy got all these markings while playing or from carelessness. It was difficult to prove the opposite, and the educators had to believe these stories. Louise also told of allegedly aggressive behavior by the older brother toward his sister. This explained why Johan no longer came to kindergarten According to her words, they feared the boy could harm other children and wanted to wait until he got older and his behavior improved. This seemed strange to the educators. Previously, they had not noticed any aggression from Johann. On the contrary, the boy seemed intimidated and withdrawn. Suspicions also arose in a neighbor of the family. He often heard how the parents yelled at the children and scolded them for the smallest offenses. Although the man could not witness physical impact, he was convinced that the punishments were not limited to words only. The neighbor reported a particularly unpleasant incident with Poppy once he heard how the stepfather loudly scolded Poppy, presumably because she had wet the bed. After a few minutes of shouting, Poppy began to cry loudly, and it was clearly not just crying from hurt feelings. The next day, the neighbor saw Poppy with a plaster cast on her leg. The man was shaken by the parents' indifference. When Poppy was brought from the hospital, her mother and stepfather did not even help her get out of the car. Poppy was transported on the bed of a pickup truck, like some cargo. Poppy climbed out laboriously by herself while carrying a heavy-looking backpack. Instead of helping, the stepfather only urged the child to hurry. The neighbor often noticed that Poppy woke up at night and began to cry bitterly. The man suspected that she was plagued by nightmares. Instead of comforting her, the parents, if at all, only reacted with raised voices and demanded quiet. Nevertheless, such episodes repeated almost every night. Poppy tried to cry quietly for about half an hour so that she would not be heard, but through the thin walls, the neighbor could perceive her sobbing. Finally, she calmed herself and fell asleep again. After the incident with the leg injury, barely after Poppy had recovered, a new disturbing incident occurred. The neighbor heard another family conflict, followed by a dull blow. Poppy burst into tears again and became very agitated. The next day, the neighbor noticed a large blue bruise on her head. In addition, Poppy's right arm seemed to move poorly. Poppy constantly pressed it to her chest. The man could not stand it anymore and went to Kobus. He asked the stepfather why Poppy cried constantly and could barely recover from severe bruises. Kobus only grinned and became angry without giving explanations. Instead, the children's mother answered. According to Louise, the new injuries were caused by a fall from the stairs while playing. She claimed Poppy was very careless and often got into such situations. It was simply a coincidence. However, the neighbor did not believe her words. An episode in winter particularly outraged him. At that time, Kobus was watering the garden. It was quite cold, and the children were sitting on the porch at that time. Suddenly, the man began to yell at them and accused them of some offenses. This seemed strange to the neighbor. He had not noticed that brother and sister had behaved badly. They were simply sitting quietly. It seemed as if the stepfather was only looking for an occasion for an outburst of rage. Finally, the neighbor could not stand it anymore and contacted the youth welfare office. The employees of the organization should conduct an inspection and create a report for the law enforcement authorities. Obviously, an official complaint should have followed after that. Nevertheless, no measures followed. The youth welfare office simply ignored the reports about the incidents and the neighbors' statements. The man had to contact the organization several times so that attention would finally be paid to the stepfather's disturbing behavior. The town was so small that there was not even a full police station, a court, and other important institutions. The nearest large police station was at least 40 kilometers away, and the neighbor had no possibility to get there himself. But he did not give up and continued to contact various local organizations to help the children. The attention of the social services to the family situation gave hope for an improvement in the children's living conditions. In August 2016, a meeting with Louise and Kobus took place. The parents were required to visit a pediatrician weekly with both children. In addition, regular consultations with a family therapist were prescribed for them. Initially, the spouses followed these instructions and gave the appearance of cooperation. In the first month, they participated in consultations twice and brought the children to medical examination just as often. It seemed as if the situation would improve. However, it was precisely during this time that the family's neighbor reported the most alarming incidents in the house. When he contacted the social service again with this information, he was assured that the situation was under control and that work was being done continuously with the family. But for some reason, these measures did not bring the desired result, and the neighbor found himself in a dead end, not knowing how else he could help. The man's statements found confirmation at the next medical examination. Traces of injuries were discovered on Poppy. When Poppy was asked about their origin, she could not give a clear answer due to her young age. It was only apparent that Poppy felt discomfort. According to regulations, the doctor should have documented any suspicious signs, but in this case, the specialist deviated from the rules. Later, he explained the absence of an entry by saying that 3-year-old Poppy could not explain the origin of the injuries, and he suspected it was ordinary childhood bruises. The doctor accepted the mother's explanation that Poppy had simply fallen while playing. As a result, no additional measures were taken. On an autumn morning in the year 2016, a neighbor discovered that the family known as Difficult had suddenly disappeared with Poppy. Their departure occurred at night, as if they wanted to avoid excessive attention. This triggered some concern. It was remarkable that Kobus had not quit his job, and the kindergarten that Poppy attended had not been informed about the move. In reality, the couple had decided to evade an upcoming doctor's visit in this way, which could have raised unwanted questions. They hoped to disappear by moving to a new place. Louisa and Kobus went to Mamagali Skral's farm, which was located a few hours away. There lived the family of Louisa's biological mother. It was a rare event that Louisa visited her mother with the children. Normally, she limited the little one's contact with their grandmother. Louisa's mother was shocked by the condition of her grandchildren despite her own difficult life experience. She immediately noticed numerous traces on their bodies. When the grandmother tried to find out from the boy the reason for these markings, he pointed to Kobus. Louisa denied any problems in the family and called Johan a liar. After this meeting, the children's grandmother was seriously concerned about the situation in her daughter's family. Out of fear of causing harm, she decided to first contact the pastor. To her surprise, instead of support, she encountered a negative reaction from the church servant. The pastor expressed the opinion that the grandmother should not interfere in the affairs of her married daughter, who must solve her problems herself. After this conversation, Louisa's mother gave up her attempts to help her grandchildren and did not contact other authorities. On the 25th of October 2016, a month after the family had refused regular medical examinations, Louisa suddenly appeared with her daughter in her arms at the local hospital. The woman reported a sudden deterioration in the child's condition and asked for help. The doctors immediately began emergency care for Cindy, but soon it became clear that their efforts came too late. The doctors were alarmed by Louisa's strange behavior. She seemed unusually calm for a mother in such a situation and mentioned her aversion to interacting with law enforcement authorities. Even more alarming, however, was Cindy's condition. She had numerous injuries. When the mother was asked about their origin, she explained this with the jolts in the car on the way to the hospital due to the bad road. This explanation was quickly refuted. The nature of the injuries could not be explained by a single incident. They indicated their occurrence at different times, which pointed to systematic, inhumane treatment of the child. The doctor noticed the second child who had arrived with the family. 5-year-old Johan behaved unusually. He tried to stay away from his parents, avoided eye contact with adults, and muttered quietly to himself. When asked about the incident, the boy answered strangely that the sister doesn't want to eat anymore. Traces of injuries were also visible on him. The entire situation aroused serious suspicions and seemed connected to a sad outcome for Cindy. Therefore, the doctor decided to contact law enforcement. Louisa and Kobe tried to dissuade him, but the doctor ignored their pleas. When the duty officer arrived at the clinic, the doctor showed him a recording of Poppy. The police officer, who had only recently become a father himself, was so shaken by the sight that he could not hold back his emotions. In his years of service, he had never been confronted with such cases, especially when it involved Poppy, who had just learned to walk. The stepfather was immediately brought to the station while Louise was left behind, as it was assumed that, like the children, she had been in an unsafe domestic environment the entire time. A complete picture of the incident will hardly be possible to reconstruct, but part of the information was painstakingly gathered from the statements of eyewitnesses, including the neighbor, the grandmother, and Poppy's biological mother, as well as from material evidence. However, many documents contained contradictions and disputed points. While Kobes was being interrogated, the officers decided to speak with Louise. The woman stated that the day before, October 24th, she had bumped into a cabinet. The next morning, Poppy's behavior had changed. She seemed lethargic, not very active, spoke little, and moved little. After lunch, Kobes returned as usual in a bad mood. Louise tried to explain that Poppy and Johan were feeling unwell, but he did not listen and became aggressive as usual. The victim's mother reported that such things happened almost daily. She did not wait until it was over, but simply went shopping. It is noteworthy that she spoke about this quite calmly. When Louisa returned, she heard from Kobes that Poppy was feeling worse. The mother found her daughter in the empty bathtub and noticed that her skin was very cold and her lips had turned blue. They tried to provide first aid, but without success. Then they decided to take her to the hospital and placed her on the bed of the pickup truck. This became one of the strangest moments of the story. Instead of carefully carrying Poppy in their arms, they placed her on the empty truck bed, where she moved as the car drove. Consequently, this served as a convenient explanation for the numerous injuries. When the grandmother saw her granddaughter's condition, she could not believe that her own daughter could have been involved. Like everyone else, she rejected the thought that this could have happened through an accidental collision with furniture. Specialists who examined the situation concluded that Poppy had been exposed to negative influences over an extended period. Numerous traces were found that indicated the systematic nature of what had happened. This indicated that Poppy had become the target of deliberate actions. When the information reached the residents, they began to express their displeasure toward the imprisoned Kobes. He was repeatedly subjected to physical impact and pressure. Louise, however, seemed to remain outside the view of law enforcement despite her inaction. Gradually, the city residents learned of the possible involvement of the mother in the incident, as well as that of the stepfather, and decided to express their outrage. On the eve of the farewell ceremony on November 4th, 2016, two unknown women in police uniforms came to Louise. They convinced her to go with them, allegedly to make a statement, but actually took her out of the city and subjected her to physical impact. It turned out that these women were not real police officers, but residents who had decided to take justice into their own hands. As a result, Poppy's mother came to the farewell ceremony for her child in a similar condition to Poppy, but unlike her, alive. Poppy's biological father, Christo Vandermerf, did not hide his emotions at the ceremony. He sat in the first row next to friends and relatives. He gave his ex-wife full responsibility, who in his opinion had never been a good mother. Louise's face, on which traces of the recent impact could be seen, remained emotionless throughout the entire service, as if what had happened to her daughter did not concern her. Louise was arrested on December 15th, 2016. She was charged with similar accusations as her husband. Despite the rapid progress of the case, the trial was postponed by 1 year. The hearings did not begin until October 2017. There were several reasons for the delay. First, no lawyer could be found who was willing to represent the interests of the accused. The defenders felt aversion toward the suspects and refused to work with them. Nevertheless, the postponements of the hearings proved advantageous for the prosecution. The additional time was sufficient to question Johan, the brother of the affected Cindy, extensively. The boy claimed that the stepfather regularly used violence against him and his sister, while the mother only watched, even covered for her husband, and did not try to help them. According to the child's statement, the physical impact was so strong that the sound sometimes drowned out their cries of pain. The boy's statements became decisive for the prosecution of the mother. Until the very end, Louisa tried to justify herself. When she brought her daughter to the hospital, she claimed to have tried to bring her back to consciousness, to have sprayed water in her face and performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Johann told a different version. His sister was wet because after the incident, the stepfather had dunked her head in water and tried to bring her back to consciousness. According to Johann, the mother simply stood in the door during this procedure and watched without intervening. Ultimately, both were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of early release. Additionally, each received another 10 years for impairing the welfare of the older child, who miraculously avoided serious consequences despite regular abuse. Even the judge expressed his outrage when announcing the verdict. He was shaken not only by the behavior of these people, but also by their absolute indifference to what had happened. All those present at the hearings agreed that the accused did not care about Cindy's fate, but only about the punishment they would receive. During the court proceedings, numerous reports from a neighbor to social services came to light, in which he asked to check the family due to suspicion of child abuse. However, no one responded appropriately to his signals. Later, the social service employees who should have contacted law enforcement justified themselves with distances and bureaucratic difficulties, due to which they could not respond to the situation in the family in time. They were not held accountable for their negligence. Each of us is accustomed to certain things that seem natural to us from birth. Unfortunately, not all people can enjoy even the most basic pleasures of life. The main character of our story is a clear example of this. She never had the opportunity to feel the warmth of parental care or experience understanding from her environment. Despite her positive qualities and good heart, fate has treated her extremely harshly. Amber Gibson grew up in a small family together with her older brother Connor. Their parents, Peter and Anne-Marie, lived in a disadvantaged neighborhood in South Lanarkshire, Scotland. Financial difficulties did not allow them to move to a better place. The head of the family, unlike the others, easily adapted to the environment. He preferred to spend his time with the bottle instead of working. The family barely made ends meet and lived on social assistance. The money was just enough for the necessities. The Gibsons' life was far from ideal. Peter did not care about the family and had an explosive temperament. From an early age, the children grew up in an atmosphere of constant tension. Although Amber was less affected by this, her brother had it difficult from childhood. Anne-Marie suffered the most, whom her husband often insulted without being embarrassed in front of the children. According to the woman, this situation repeated regularly, but she could not find the strength to resist. Finally, she decided to go to the police. Investigations began, and the man was accused of inappropriate behavior. During the investigation, Peter did not hide his character. He continued to intimidate his wife, which made her seriously worry about her well-being. However, this only worsened the accused's situation and became additional evidence in court. Peter was sentenced to imprisonment. The reason for this was not only family conflicts, but also a series of other offenses he had committed between 2001 and 2008. They were all characterized by aggressive behavior. The man obviously posed a danger to his environment. He could not explain the reasons for his actions and only said that in moments of anger he simply lost control. Later, it turned out that Peter had once caused harm to an unknown woman. The victim reported that at one moment she had resigned herself to the worst outcome, but the aggressor unexpectedly stopped his actions. For all these offenses, the court imposed a sentence of 10 years imprisonment against Peter. It is obvious that the children could not grow up happy and cheerful in such an unfavorable family environment. The atmosphere in the house was tense and stressful. Connor had it particularly hard. From an early age, he was confronted with harsh treatment and psychological pressure. The situation changed in the year 2008, when the father was imprisoned. At this time, the oldest child was 5 years old and Amber was 3 years old. It seemed as if the family could finally breathe freely. But unfortunately, after her husband's arrest, the mother began to consume alcohol excessively and stopped caring for the children. The social services decided to place Connor and Amber in the care of Craig and Carol Niven. The new parents felt compassion for the fate of the little ones who had the misfortune of being born in such an unfavorable environment created by their biological parents. The Niven couple had long wanted children but could not have their own. The adopted children became for them an opportunity to show parental love and care. However, not everyone supported this decision. The children's biological grandparents could not obtain custody. They suspected that the Nivens only took in the adopted children because of the financial support from the state. Despite the objections, guardianship was finally granted, and the children moved to Hamilton, Scotland. Amber was described as a lovable, friendly girl. She had a modest but cheerful character that fortunately was not spoiled in the previous family. Despite the difficult beginning of life, she remained a positive person, was intelligent and well-developed for her age. She loved art and sang, which delighted her new family. Unfortunately, the same could not be said about her brother Connor. The difficult experiences of early childhood had strongly influenced the boy. Even at a young age, behavioral problems were noticed in him. He was withdrawn and had difficulties getting along with his classmates. Connor was known for sudden outbursts of anger during which he could become aggressive toward others. In his character, he increasingly resembled his father. Most often, girls became the target of his aggression. Despite his attractive appearance, Connor was characterized by a headstrong character and an unusual sense of humor. His jokes often shocked the people around him with their darkness, which is why his classmates tried to stay away from him and considered him strange and unpleasant. Nobody took his statements about harm seriously and assumed that it was just part of his eccentric humor. However, this behavior led to Connor having practically no friends. This isolation was reinforced not only by his unusual character, but also by clear signs of psychological problems, which caused concern among the people around him. Connor actively used social media where he shared disturbing thoughts. In one of his posts during school time, he described his difficulties in detail. It was obvious that he had serious problems with socialization and was aware of his condition, but could not cope with it. He wrote about problems with eating behavior, depressive mood, anxiety states, and concentration difficulties. Naturally, this affected his academic performance. Some teachers believed that the young man had learning difficulties, as he showed no interest in lessons and often skipped classes. Unfortunately, nobody conducted the necessary examinations to confirm these assumptions, so Connor's exact diagnosis remained unknown. As an adolescent, he was left alone with his age-related and psychological problems. Connor complained that people judged him superficially without trying to understand him. In reality, he did not consider himself a bad person, but simply wanted to overcome the consequences of the difficult relationship with his father. The young man was convinced that his father was responsible for all these problems. Despite attempts to improve communication, the young man could not find a common language even with his biological sister, who was only a few years younger than him. The foster parents tried not to leave them alone, knowing that this could lead to serious conflicts. They tried to separate the children from an early age so that their meetings took place under adult supervision. But even under supervision, Connor looked for reasons for arguments with his sister, which is why the foster parents sent them to different schools to minimize their contact. In his teenage years, Connor was transferred to a special educational institution for young people with social and emotional difficulties. Amber continued her education at a regular school. Growing up was difficult for the children, especially Connor. Due to his complicated character, he had difficulties building romantic relationships. Connor's explosive nature scared others away, and girls avoided contact with him. This triggered anger in him, which he often took out on his sister. The situation escalated to such an extent that 14-year-old Amber asked to be transferred to a boarding school because she was afraid to be near her brother. Connor remained with his foster parents until he came of age. In the year 2020, he decided to live independently and joined the Blue Triangle Project in Hamilton, which provided housing for those in need. In fact, he moved into a homeless shelter. Despite the separate living situations, Amber and Connor continued to see each other, although their communication remained tense. Conflicts still occurred frequently, but since they now lived separately, they encountered each other face-to-face less often. Unfortunately, Amber's life did not become calmer. In June 2021, she had a traumatic experience with 20-year-old Jamie Stars, for which he was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. Remarkably, he had previously been accused of a similar offense but had been released on bail. Amber needed a long time to recover from the incident and sought support from family and friends. She suffered greatly from what had happened, while her brother remained indifferent to her condition. During this difficult time, Amber desperately sought support and tried to improve relationships with everyone she considered family, including Connor. On the 26th of November 2021, Amber told a friend about her evening plans. She wanted to see her brother again after a long time. Amber was excited about the upcoming meeting and hoped for positive changes in their relationship. She sincerely believed that past disagreements would be behind them and they could finally restore their sibling connection. At this time, she was still under the care of a children's home. Interestingly, the initiative for the meeting came from Connor. He himself had approached the management of the institution. Amber was allowed to spend a few hours with her brother, with her return expected in the evening. Amber's friend tried to dissuade her, reminding her of past unpleasant situations with Connor, but she stuck to her decision. During the meeting, Amber took a selfie with her brother and posted it on social media. In the photo, she looked happy. After that, no one heard from her again. Around midnight, Connor returned to his dormitory. He went immediately to the office, which caught the attention of a female employee. Later, she admitted that his appearance and behavior had disturbed her. Connor seemed gloomy and disheveled. He was breathing heavily and his hands were dirty up to his wrists. The concerned woman inquired about his condition, but Connor ignored the questions. Instead, he asked for permission to make a call. According to his words, he and his sister had argued, and he had to leave, but now wanted to make sure that she had safely returned to the children's home. Connor actually called there, but it turned out that Amber had not returned for the night. The staff of the institution contacted the foster parents, but they had not seen Amber either. Originally, the siblings' meeting took place at the foster parents' house. Then the teenagers went for a walk to speak privately. According to Connor, they separated after a walk in Cadzo Glen Park and he returned to the dormitory. Soon after, a missing person report was filed for Amber. The investigators determined that Amber had no romantic relationship, was not planning to leave, and all her belongings had remained in the dormitory. These facts raised serious concerns among the investigators about her well-being. At the same time, Connor's behavior seemed strange. Despite his sister's disappearance, he made no contact with the foster parents to discuss the situation. The young man did nothing to learn anything about Amber's fate. He simply sat and waited. At this point, law enforcement had already begun searching and trying to find clues. A logical step was to approach the person who had last spoken with Amber. The investigators drove to Connor and he confirmed that they had gone for a walk together in the evening. According to the young man, an argument had occurred between them as usual. After the argument, Connor had left and left his sister upset in the park. Allegedly, he then wandered around the area for a long time before reaching his dormitory. The young man claimed not to know the area well, which sounded strange since he had grown up there. Nevertheless, he insisted that he had gotten lost and even fallen into a ditch in the darkness, which explained his dirty appearance when he came to make the call. The young man's narrative aroused the investigators' suspicion. He could effortlessly show on the map where he had met his sister, where they had spent time in the park, and where they had separated. However, he suddenly became uncertain when asked about the approximate location of the ditch. The investigators tried to find out who Connor had been with at that time and who could confirm his statements. But the young man evaded answers to these questions and became entangled in contradictions. The police officers could not obtain clarity from him. Finally, they let him go and continued investigating the disappearance. 2 days had passed since Amber's disappearance. On the 28th of November, around 10:15 in the morning, 45-year-old Stephen Corrigan called the emergency services. He reported that during a walk in Cadzo Glen Park, he had discovered a motionless young woman. The investigators arrived at the discovery site, which was located 200 meters from the bridge where Amber had last been seen. They immediately began checking the information provided by Corrigan. After conducting the necessary procedures, the identity of the young woman found could be established. As suspected, it was 16-year-old Amber Gibson. This news shocked everyone who knew the young woman and became a turning point in the investigation. After the incident, Connor published a moving message on social media dedicated to his sister. He expressed his grief over her premature death and regretted that the world had not had the opportunity to learn what a wonderful person she had been. People brought flowers to the place where Amber was found. No one could understand what had happened to Amber and who could be responsible for it. At the same time, Connor made contact with a local newspaper. He wanted to give an interview about his sister. The young man described her as an exceptional personality and wanted to tell people how Amber really was with her difficult fate. The journalist arranged a meeting for the 2nd of December in a small cafe. However, Connor did not appear. The reason for this was that he had already been arrested at that time on suspicion of involvement in Amber's disappearance. The medical examination revealed traces on Amber's neck. Additionally, some injuries were discovered that presumably came from a blunt object. The experts suspected that the perpetrator might have had personal motives. In their opinion, Amber was first inflicted with physical injuries, after which she lost consciousness. However, the final cause of the tragedy was an obstruction of normal breathing. Amber had traces of dirt on her, as if she had been dragged across the ground. Nearby, Amber's heavily damaged clothing was found. Surprisingly, it turned out that the tragedy had taken place 2 days before Stephen Corrigan's report to the police. The man had a confirmed alibi at the time of the incident, which ruled out his involvement. Meanwhile, Amber's brother's behavior raised more and more questions. The investigators were aware of the young man's difficult character and his frequent arguments with his sister. It turned out that Connor had reported on social media about what had happened to Amber a few hours before the discovery. This caused amazement. How could he know this when Amber was still considered missing? Moreover, the brother was the last one to have seen her. These circumstances prompted the police to examine Connor's actions more closely and search for evidence for a possible charge. The investigators managed to obtain recordings from surveillance cameras that helped clarify Amber's last hours. The cameras recorded how she walked through the city with her brother Connor and then over a bridge near the park. The young people can be seen in the recording at 21:57. A few minutes earlier, at 21:51, Amber took a selfie with Connor and posted it on social media. In the photo, she looked cheerful. This indicated that the meeting was going well. Presumably, they were on their way to the park where Amber was later found. About an hour and a half later, the recordings show Connor returning alone. No one else was captured by the cameras. Connor could also be tracked on video recordings from the facades of his dormitory. In front of the building's entrance, he threw part of his clothing into a garbage container, which aroused suspicion. Law enforcement examined the containers and found the jacket the young man had worn that night. Interestingly, he did not dispose of the other items. Traces of dirt and biological material were found on Connor's jacket, as well as on his shoes. The examination confirmed that these traces came from Amber, which indicated the brother's involvement in his sister's disappearance. Connor probably did not throw away most of the clothing and shoes due to lack of means for new items. Instead, he tried to clean them, but did so carelessly, which helped the investigation. Biological traces were also found on Amber's clothing. The analysis revealed that they came from Connor. Presumably, he injured himself when she defended herself. Other traces of her brother were also found on Amber. Now the investigators could directly connect him to the incident. The examination of the young man's phone showed that the next day around noon, he sent a message to a group chat with 5 people asking for help with the search. 40 seconds later, he wrote to his sister asking if everything was all right with her. Later, Connor wrote to the group again saying that no help was needed and it had been a bad joke. Then search queries were found in the browser history about how to avoid surveillance on mobile phones and protect data from police checks. Obviously, he was trying to cover the traces of his actions. During the investigation of the messages on Connor's mobile phone, a disturbing side of the relationship between brother and sister was uncovered. According to the messages, he had previously committed inappropriate actions toward Amber and intimidated her so that she would not tell the foster parents or authorities anything about it. This was one of the reasons why she so urgently wanted to leave the foster family's house at 14 years old. Amber remained silent about these incidents due to intimidation by her brother or due to complicated feelings toward him. Shortly before her disappearance, however, she seemed to have decided to share this information with her foster parents. This could have been the reason for a conflict. The investigators reconstructed an approximate picture of the events of that fateful night. Presumably, Connor met with his sister. They actually went for a walk with the intention of improving their relationship. On the camera recordings, it can be seen that they initially spoke calmly with each other. Everything looked normal. Then they entered the park where the incident happened. The conflict was probably provoked by the young man and occurred spontaneously. On the other hand, it was not ruled out that the incident was planned in advance. However it may be, Connor committed something unforgivable toward Amber. The young man left his sister in the same park after bringing her to another location, literally on a footpath. On the 2nd of December 2021, 18-year-old Connor Gibson was arrested without having the chance to meet with a journalist to create the image of a grieving brother. He was charged with serious accusations regarding his own sister. Despite all the evidence, Connor continued to deny his involvement in the incident. However, the investigators had numerous direct evidence against the young man that left no doubt about his involvement. Traces that could be attributed to Amber were found on his clothing and shoes, and his biological material was found on the young woman and her clothing. Cameras recorded him near the crime scene, and he had no alibi. The investigators analyzed the activities of the suspect's mobile device and directed their attention to his unusual search queries. The young man unsuccessfully tried to find information about how he could hide his data. After his arrest, his adoptive parents repeatedly expressed criticism. Questions about the young man's social adaptation, his interaction with classmates and acquaintances from the orphanage always caused concern to his relatives. Connor's interests were quite dark, and his relationship with his sister was never characterized by warmth. During the investigation, their correspondence was discovered, which concerned earlier incidents and was also used as evidence. When Amber's disappearance became known, Connor showed no concern whatsoever, as if it did not affect him at all. He seemed confident that he could mislead the investigation. This could indicate certain thought patterns of the young man that might be related to his mental state. The adoptive parents reported that in the days when the search for Amber continued, they could not establish contact with Connor. He did not participate in any way in the search operation, despite the general concern. Now he faced trial. The prosecution had such solid evidence against Connor that the defense had practically nothing to counter with. The lawyers unsuccessfully tried to draw attention to the absence of video recordings that would have directly documented Connor's actions toward the young woman. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras at this remote location, so no direct video evidence existed. Nevertheless, there was more than enough other evidence. The court proceedings lasted 13 days, after which the jury retired for deliberation. The jury unanimously reached a guilty verdict on all charges. Connor Gibson received a life sentence with the possibility of applying for early release after 22 years. The story of Amber and Connor shocked many people with its tragedy. These siblings, who faced a difficult childhood, could not find a common language. Their path was full of trials, from complicated relationships with parents to separation in the foster system. Amber always strived to establish a connection with her brother, Despite warnings from friends and past conflicts, she believed in the possibility of reconciliation, but this belief led to sad consequences. Connor's behavior during the court proceedings raised many questions. He remained indifferent and showed no emotions whatsoever. This prompted many to think about his mental state. Experts noted that childhood in a problematic environment could have seriously influenced his development. The lawyer insisted that the young man had long sought help, which was evidenced by his posts on social media where he shared his problems. The relatives of Amber and Connor expressed dissatisfaction with the foster system and the foster parents. They believed that the latter did not pay enough attention to the problem-laden adolescents and had only taken them in because of the financial support from the state. Furthermore, they expressed concerns about the fate of other children who were in the care of this family. The foster parents, for their part, rejected all accusations. They claimed that despite the difficulties, they had done everything to support Amber and Connor. The decision to separate brother and sister was made, according to their words, in the interest of Amber's safety. They also noted that they had not been informed about earlier incidents between the adolescents. After reaching the age of majority, Connor independently decided to move to a homeless shelter. For a time, brother and sister tried to restore their relationship, and the foster parents supported these attempts. Unfortunately, no one could foresee what tragic consequences this situation would lead to.